Well, hello there. My name is Ernie and I am a building inspector. I'm a bit like a super sleuth detective. Well, I think I am. Well, I get to check things out and keep people safe by making sure builders are doing their job right. And I've seen it all in my job, although I'm a bit partial to experimental and new ideas. The best bit is that I get to travel everywhere in my van. My works van. And it's red, well it was cheap, and it came with a toy pet. Cat. Black and white, called Jess. Don't know if you've ever heard of a black and white cat called Jess, but anyway. So I go round delivering my parcels of good and bad news, but always with a cheery whistle and a happy smile. I'd like to say that everybody likes me, but sometimes I have to investigate, like Sherlock Holmes, and find out whether a builder is any good or not, and whether the house is safe or not. It's a pretty cool job really, and I love it. I've worked with skyscrapers and garden sheds. I've worked with brand new houses and old ones. Houses on mountains, in valleys, and even a few on beaches. But nothing prepared me for what I was to see one day, where a couple of houses were being built next to each other. One was a beach house mansion, and the other was built on some rocks a little further away from the edge of the water. Now, me personally, I love a beach hut, and I'm not an actual builder myself, but I do know what you need to do. This beach house was being built by Mrs. I.M. Good, a firm that was apparently started up many years ago, although it seems there aren't any examples of their houses that you can actually see. Apparently, they've been waiting to release details of them all for 30 years, but they keep losing the paperwork and the photos and the addresses. Seems sensible enough. They've all got their hard hats and steel toe cap boots, and the managers have super clean high-vis jackets, so they must be good. Now, the rock house is being built by Mr. Letts, who lives somewhere near Lettsby Avenue. He has a very dirty high-vis jacket. He has lots of photos of the houses that he's built, and lots of references too, but you can't trust references these days. He's got so very many, and his high-vis jacket and his hard hat are so dirty, so he must be dodgy. Anyway, my first visit to them was to look at the foundations of their next two projects. Mrs. Good had actually worked so fast she told me that her foundations were already sorted. She found plans for them on the internet and everything, so she'd already built the house when I arrived. She showed me the plans. I wasn't so sure that because sand can melt and turn to glass, which is super hard, that her design would be especially useful or strong or structurally safe, but we thought we'd give it the benefit of the doubt. Like I said, I do like new ideas. Mr. Letts' house on the rocks was quite a bit further behind. Well, it wasn't a house at all really, more like lots of deep trenches with more concrete in those super wide, super long, super wide trenches than a concrete factory. He said it could get a bit wet and windy around here, but glass is hard, right? And concrete is so last year, it's so old school, even my great-great-great-granddad used concrete on his granddad's house. Glass is modern and contemporary, so it must be better. I went away wondering where they'd be in a few months' time on my next visit. Well, October came around pretty quick this year, so I headed out to the beach for the 3-month inspection. Mrs. I.M. Good said she'd had people living in hers for weeks now. It sounded quick, but hey, glass is super easy to work with. I arrived and could see the light show coming from a fairground ride built right in the centre of the beach hut. Laser shows, fog machines, the works. Meanwhile, I was struggling to see the house on the rocks. I was looking, and then I saw the teeniest glint off the last little remnant of the high-vis jacket on Mr. Letts. It was starting to rain, and the wind was picking up, so I hurried along. I wanted to get home before this got much worse. Mr. Letts was beaming from ear to ear, his biggest grin, his brightest smile. Turns out he'd actually made concrete cool again by polishing it. It did look pretty cool. Turns out he'd been so busy building the foundations that the house had taken something of a back seat. He'd only ended up building 1 story high, a bungalow, really. It was kind of hard to hear him over the noise of the wind and the band at Mrs. I Am Good's house on the beach, and the wind and the rain was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Turns out this was Mr. Letts' last house build. He was off to university next to teach building houses. Since you could barely see the house because it was so low from the ground, I wasn't sure how well he'd get on teaching people to build houses. So with darkness setting in, I was grateful for the lightning coming from the sky and the laser show from the beach house, so I could see what I was writing on my report. And then, with the wind getting worse and worse and worse, I heard a strange noise. People were shouting, and there was a loud cracking sound. I thought it was thunder, but before my very eyes the beach house collapsed in on itself with one great big crash. Everyone got out okay, but man, that house was totaled. I moved my pen from past to must try harder. With the wind and the waves getting even worse, we all retreated to the house on the rocks, and it turns out it wasn't all that low after all. Mr. Letts had built the house and the foundation so deep he'd buried some of the house. We all assembled in the very large dance hall he'd made in the centre of the house. I was about to fail this build and say it wasn't suitable to be lived in, but Mr. Letts' final build of his career was amazing. A few weeks later, I was attending our local university to hear Mr. Letts speak his first ever lecture. I was a little bit late, but clearly on the front row sat Mrs. I Am Good and all the builders from her company. Mr. Letts continued his lecture. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built the house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash.